Beneath the last shimmering traces of sunlight, far below the twilight zone and into the cold realm where darkness becomes absolute, stretches a part of our planet that remains more mysterious than the surface of Mars. The abyssal seafloor, flat, silent, and ancient, has long been imagined as an empty desert, a place where nothing happens and nothing changes. Yet over the decades, oceanographers have discovered something that contradicts this image entirely. Vast fields of perfect circles etched into the sediment, geometric depressions that repeat themselves with surprising regularity across areas thousands of meters deep. Symmetrical, sharply defined, and remarkably consistent, these circles have puzzled scientists since the first detailed seafloor surveys revealed their presence. And although myths and imagination eagerly rush to fill such gaps with hidden monsters or ancient structures, the real story behind these circles is far more fascinating because it is true. What looks at first like an intentional design is instead the product of natural biological and geological processes that occur on timescales and in conditions unlike anything on land. The abyssal plain is not a barren wasteland. It is shaped slowly, quietly, by constant activity from creatures adapted to the most extreme conditions on Earth. And as scientists began studying these formations more closely, they realized that these circles are not anomalies. They are signatures of life, written in the language of sediment and survival. To understand these mysterious shapes, one must first picture the environment in which they form. At depths of 4,000 to 6,000 meters, the seafloor is covered in a blanket of fine particles known as marine snow, a continuous rain of organic debris drifting down from the surface. This layer accumulates millimeter by millimeter across centuries, building a soft, easily disturbed carpet of sediment. In such a still world, even the faintest movement can leave long-lasting marks. A passing creature, a feeding event, a burrow opening, the subtle swirl of a current, all these become preserved in the substrate like footprints in untouched snow. It is within this delicate canvas that the circles appear. Broad depressions, some small and some stretching several meters across, their edges rising slightly above the central pit, as though the sediment has been pushed outward from within. These rings appear in clusters, sometimes aligned, sometimes scattered. Their distribution spans vast regions, from the Pacific abyssal plains to the North Atlantic deep basins. Yet in each location, the circles share the same near-perfect geometry. To encounter them is to confront a paradox, order in a place that should be governed entirely by randomness. Early hypotheses lean toward geology. Could they be collapse pits caused by pockets of methane gas? Could they be remnants of ancient hydrothermal activity? Or perhaps they were sinkholes formed by the weight of shifting sediment. But these possibilities quickly unraveled under scrutiny. Geological depressions are rarely perfect circles. Their edges are rough, disrupted by chaotic forces. Meanwhile, abyssal plains are some of the most geologically stable environments on Earth, flat expanses where major tectonic activity is minimal. The circles, however, appeared in places where no known geological event could have carved them. This left scientists with only one possible explanation: biology. Yet this possibility seemed counterintuitive. What organism could create structures of such precision in the crushing quiet of the deep? The abyss hosts creatures that are soft, slow, and energy limited. Few leave behind distinct traces, let alone geometric ones. But that assumption stemmed from the human intuition of what deep-sea life should look like, not from the true complexity of the ecosystem. One key to solving the mystery came from the study of holothurians, commonly known as sea cucumbers. These unassuming creatures are among the most abundant animals on the abyssal seafloor. They crawl across the sediment using tube feet, feeding by sweeping organic-rich mud into their mouths. Certain species exhibit a unique feeding behavior. They rotate their bodies in slow arcs as they move. Over long periods, this repeated rotation creates circular trails. Their feeding pits are widened further as they churn the sediment, producing depressions with raised outer rims. Although each individual sea cucumber may only shape a small circle, over time and across populations, these behaviors become replicated at scale, forming the first piece of the puzzle. But holothurians alone cannot account for all circles, especially the larger ones. This brings us to another major contributor to abyssal architecture: burrowing animals such as polychaete worms, amphipods, and small crustaceans. These organisms construct intricate radial networks beneath the seafloor. Their burrows branch outward from a central chamber, much like the spokes of a wheel. When these tunnels collapse due to shifting flows, sedimentation, or abandonment, they produce bowl-shaped depressions with natural symmetry. To a human observer, these pits resemble intentional designs. To the animals that built them, they are simply shelters and feeding structures, created unconsciously, yet producing order. Perhaps the most unexpected engineer of these formations is a creature that defies conventional expectations entirely: the xenophyophore, a single-celled organism that can grow to astonishing sizes. These giants of the microscopic world collect sediment grains, glue them together, and construct elaborate, sometimes circular, external shells called tests. When a xenophyophore dies or its test collapses, it leaves behind a distinctive imprint, a shallow circular depression surrounded by a ring of displaced material. Xenophyophores often cluster densely, creating multiple overlapping circles across the seafloor. Because they dominate many deep-sea habitats, their cumulative presence makes them a major architect of abyssal geometry. All these biological processes interact with the physical forces of the deep sea, which contribute an additional layer of refinement to the circles. Though the abyss feels motionless, it is shaped by slow-moving bottom currents that sweep across the seafloor like ghostly winds. These flows are not powerful enough to reshape the terrain dramatically, but they can gradually smooth and sharpen existing features. As a result, biological depressions often become more symmetrical over time. A burrow collapse that begins as an uneven hole may become a near-perfect circle after months of sediment redistribution. This cooperative shaping, life initiating the pattern, currents perfecting it, is a hallmark of ecological complexity. Even more intriguing is the temporal nature of the circles. When scientists revisited certain sites months or years after their initial surveys, they found that many rings had altered shape or position. Some had expanded, others had softened at the edges, a few had disappeared entirely. This indicates that the circles are not ancient relics, but living, evolving features, traces of ongoing biological processes. The abyssal seafloor is not a static archive. It is a dynamic landscape reshaped continually by the beings that inhabit it. But why circles? Why not squares, spirals, or random blotches? In nature, perfect circles often emerge when forces spread energy equally in all directions. A creature feeding from a fixed point may disrupt sediment in a circular radius. A burrow that expands evenly creates a round chamber. A colony of invertebrates that establishes itself around a central oxygen or nutrient source forms a ring, much like trees growing around a water hole. Even the rotation of a crawling organism produces circular imprints. The circle, rather than being deliberate, is simply a mathematically efficient outcome of numerous small, repeated actions. What makes these circles especially fascinating is how easily they could be mistaken for something intentional. Human beings are pattern-seeking creatures. We interpret geometry as design. But deep below the world of sunlight and air, life engineers its environment through simple, unconscious behaviors: feeding, burrowing, sifting, collecting, and the cumulative effect is complexity greater than any individual organism could realize. This phenomenon is an example of emergent pattern formation, a process where orderly structures arise not from centralized control, but from the interaction of many small agents over long periods. It is the same principle behind sand dunes, murmuring flocks of birds, and even the formation of galaxies. In the abyss, emergent patterns take the form of circles drawn by creatures with no concept of shape, symmetry, or geometry. Understanding these formations teaches scientists something profound. The deep ocean is not empty, not chaotic, and not static. It is a vibrant, ever-changing environment with its own architects, engineers, and subtle processes. Creatures barely visible to the naked eye are shaping landscapes on a scale that defies expectation. The circles are their fingerprints, not messages or symbols, but reflections of life adapting to extreme conditions. The mystery of the abyssal circles was never truly about the shapes themselves, but about what they represent. They are reminders that the ocean's deepest floors are alive with activity, that biological processes unfold even in places where light never reaches, and that life constantly interacts with geology to create structures that tell a story millions of years in the making. What once seemed an enigma turns out to be a revelation. Nature's architecture does not need intention to be beautiful. In the quiet darkness of the abyss, with no audience and no purpose beyond survival, life has been shaping perfect circles for millennia, patiently, subtly, and endlessly. And the more scientists study them, the clearer it becomes that the deep sea still holds countless mysteries waiting not to be imagined, but to be understood.